Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. A few people have said to me, what do you think of Deontay Wilder's comeback fight? Do you have anything to say? Well, I've got plenty to say on anything, I suppose, like we all have. We can all give an opinion, but I wasn't going to do a preview video, because I don't really know anything about the guy he's facing. The man in question is Hurn, who I'd never heard of him. I may have seen him fight Richard Torres when he got bombed out in 2 rounds. That was back in 2023, October 2023. But I can't even remember that fight, if I'm being honest. So Herndon, I had a look at his box rec before I did this video. 24 wins with 15 KOs, 5 defeats and 4 are by stoppage, which of course does not bode well if you're going in against Deontay Wilder, even a Deontay Wilder who is in this depleted state. I expect Wilder to win. Again, I can't really comment on Herndon because I've seen virtually nothing of him. I think he's about 6'3", so that makes him 3 inches shorter than Wilder. So it's not like he's got any conceivable advantage really, even in terms of maybe natural weight. Yeah, maybe he's a little bit heavier if you want to call that an advantage. Doesn't necessarily follow that it is, but no. I mean, this is a sort of gimme for Wilder. The idea being that I've lost several fights in succession, or I've certainly within Wilder's actually lost all 4 of his defeats are in his last 5 fights. The only victory was against Robert Helenius back in 2022. He was last seen in a ring about a year ago, getting flattened by Zhilei Zhang. Prior to that, he lost on points to Joseph Parker. And prior to the Helenius 1-round win, he lost twice to Tyson Fury, both by stoppage. So 4 defeats in 5 fights and 3 by stoppage. Doesn't really bode well against anything even approaching world class. However, as we've said, Herndon is anything but world class. So the question is, why is Wilder continuing? I mean, he's made millions. He was, his career, even if you think it was, very, very carefully managed, it was nevertheless lucratively managed in that he made lots of money with the exception of Fury and possibly Luis Ortiz, facing no one during quite a lengthy WBC title reign. Shelley Finkel and Al Heyman took a guy with limited ability who had one very powerful trick, which was that big right hand, and gave him quite a legacy. I mean, he did hold that belt for a long time, even though the quality of the opposition in his defences was poor. I suppose if you want to be really sort of pedantic, you could say, well, what about Floyd Patterson? He didn't beat any real killers. Even Ingemar Johansson, he won 2 of those 3 fights, but was Johansson ever really, a leading world-class fighter? Yeah, I suppose you can say he was, but he wasn't an absolute killer. You know what I mean? So there have been fighters in the past, not just at heavyweight, but throughout boxing history, who have been very carefully managed, gently treading through the minefield, trying to avoid the really big mines. And Wilder is one of them. But he was entertaining because he had that big, high twitch fibre wallop of a right hand. And he set it up well. I mean, he could blind you with a jab. And then because that right hand was so fast and so quick, he'd put you away. And people forget, even against Fury, even though, in my opinion, he lost all 3 of those fights. In fact, he got a draw in the first fight. He had Fury on the floor 4 times in those 3 fights. And Fury is a much, much bigger man in terms of muscle mass, skeletal frame, and so on. Much bigger man. But Wilder put him on the floor 4 times. So, I mean, he's maximised his talent, and don't forget, he also started boxing late. The story is that he only became a professional boxer because I think his daughter has a spina bifida, and he wanted to provide for her. And it's quite a noble story. He's from Alabama. I lived in Alabama for several years. I know what it's like. It's not exactly a boxing hotbed. Is he from Tuscaloosa or Birmingham? I think it's Tuscaloosa. Yeah, I remember those years well, 20-something years ago when I was over there. But it is not a boxing hotbed, Alabama. It's one of the, it's considered in boxing terms one of the boonies. But I give Wilder credit, I mean, for taking his talent and maximising it. And even though his record is extremely padded with, D-level fighters, especially during the first 30 fights of his career, he still has 43 wins with 42 KOs. Bermain Stavern is the only guy who's taken in the distance in a victory, and in the rematch he flattened Stavern in the first round. But there again, of the 4 defeats, like I say, they've all come in his last 5 fights, and in 3 of them have been by stoppage, and he's got the very debatable draw with Tyson Fury. So why is he continuing to fight? Well, I'm going to put my amateur psychologist's hat on here and say that I think this is a guy who he's made, that bronze bomber alter ego the focal point of his life. It's given his life, wealth, meaning, and so on. It's given him a legacy, a very hard-hitting heavyweight champ, and that sort of reputation. And he quite simply, and I don't think this is anything revelatory, but he's trying to regain some of that lost luster. And if he continues fighting people like Tyrell Herndon, who, let's face it, is probably on a par with, maybe even a bit better than most of Wilder's, like I say, first 30 fights, then yeah, he'll continue to regain that type of gravitas. The question is, of course, now that was he 40 now? 39, 40? What's he going to do? How long is he going to go on for? I mean, 40 isn't, in this day and age, ancient for a heavyweight, but it's not young. It's still quite an age. And I think it's a question for Wilder of trying to get a bit of momentum going again, even if it is against second-raters or third-raters, and regaining that sort of shattered confidence. Because as much as he talks, his confidence must have been at least badly fractured anyway. And it may well be irreparable. We don't know yet. But here's the thing. Remember, George Foreman passed away earlier this year, quite recently. And I'm not old enough to remember Foreman's first career, but I do remember his comeback, and I followed his comeback 10 years after his second defeat to, was it Jimmy Young, wasn't it? 10-round decision. I followed that second career from start to finish. And trust me when I tell you that even if you look at the record on BoxRec, you can glaringly see that Foreman was fighting very, very regularly, and fighting absolute no-hopers. No hopes at all. He even made an appearance at Wembley, I think. It's Wembley I can't remember the year, but he flattened some guy in a round. But the fact is, even though he was fighting absolutely nobody, he was nevertheless busy, and he was building up a public perception that Big George was back. And of course, he reinvented himself personality-wise. He looked different because he was bald, that big, head of black hair. And he's very personable. I was very self-effacing, complete polar opposite of his first career. His ego, even though, of course, our ego is always there, but he sort of parked it at the door. And he just kept winning and winning and winning against all the usual regular losers. And gradually he built himself into a position where he was able to, challenge Evander Holyfield. He lost that fight, lost to Tommy Morrison. But then eventually, of course, he got to the top of the mountain and knocked out Michael Moorer. Now, if Wilder is prepared to put in the work and do that sort of thing, yeah, he can, even though hardcore fans, for want of a better phrase, will know that he's way past his best and he was never as good as his glittering knockout record suggests, Wilder will nevertheless be able to put himself back in the shop window and get himself another title fight. It's not impossible, but he's got to keep busy. He's got, even if he's flattening these no-hopers, he's got to build up that public perception amongst the casuals, amongst, yeah. And also a few people are going to say, well, you know what, he always did hit pretty hard. I wonder if he could land that big right hand and maybe, regain a bit of past glory. That to me is what he's got to do. Why is he doing it? Like I said earlier, because it's part of his identity, the bronze bomber. There's Deontay Wilder. He said this himself. There's Deontay Wilder and then there's the bronze bomber. One is a regular guy. The other one an absolute killer. And he probably wants to regain that, even though he's I would imagine. I know he didn't have a divorce, or I'm sure he got taken to the cleaners like they all do. But I'm sure he's not short of a few dollars. So money's always nice. And there's money to be made, if he could get back onto another Riyadh card, for example. But I think this has probably got as much to do with Wilder's ego, his identity, wanting to regain some of that pride that he had, because he was always a very prideful man, swaggering around, talking, about being like a king, he just had that. It's like he wanted to be a significant historical sports figure. And that over the last few years has been shattered. So if he was to come back, and let's be honest, if he did string together quite a few victories over no-hopers and he went on a run of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fights, whatever, on his record, considering he's lost his last he's lost 4 out of his last 5, that alone would regain some of his past achievements, or past reputation, maybe. So I think he's continuing, as much for his own mental health almost as he is for the money. Although again, the money is nice, but I don't really see him going anywhere. I mean, if he fights the Herndons of the world between now and when he retires, he might go undefeated, But I think the moment he steps up, he's going to get found out again. Now, there is one more thing we have to mention, and that is he going to be trained by Malik Scott anymore? Because, in my opinion, the whole Malik Scott episode was a disaster for Wilder. I think I'm right in saying that the first time Malik Scott was in charge of Wilder's corner is it the third Fury fight, in which case they've had 4 fights together and Wilder has lost 3, 2 by KO. And I mean, I made a video a long, long time ago cracking the old joke that Malik Scott has turned Deontay Wilder into Malik Scott, because suddenly everything that worked for Wilder, the big power, the aggression, he threw a reasonable jab to blind you and mask the big missile that was incoming, the big Scud missile. All those very basic things that he did suddenly went out the window. And Scott tried to turn him into some sort of boxer. I mean, it's disaster. It's a disaster. If only he'd stuck with Mark Breland, who seemed to really understand Wilder's style, his limitations, and work within them. But he didn't do that, did he? And is Scott going to be in the corner for the next fight? I've heard he isn't. But they're meant to be like very, very close friends. Fair enough, nothing wrong with that, of course. But it just didn't work out as a trainer-fighter team duo. And I think you can actually make a case for Malik Scott certainly contributing greatly to the downfall of Deontay Wilder. I'm nothing against Malik Scott, of course. I've never met the man, but it was an awful, mismatch of styles, personalities, and so on. And of course, as we know, Wilder knocked out Scott in a round anyway. So, but anyway. Have a think. What do you tell me about Wilder? What do you think about Wilder? Do you think he's got anything left? Do you think he can achieve anything still? But most importantly, most interestingly for me, why do you think he's carrying on? Do you agree with me that it's to regain a past identity, past self-esteem, self-respect, however you want to phrase it, or do you think maybe you think it's purely for the money? I don't know. You tell me. Leave your comments below. Thanks as always for watching. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and also subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'm looking forward to reading what you've got to say. Until then, I will catch you later, and bye for now.